the thing that seems to be most effective with all these dietary approaches and these lifestyle approaches, the things that work the most and have the most transformative effect are the approaches that lead us back to nature. And that's not like a trivial thing, because when you go to Barnes & Noble and you look at all those books and you look at these diet programs and these pseudo-fitness, weight loss programs, whatever, you start to realize most of it is consumer-based, it's based in fear, and it's actually based in civilization, which has nothing to do with health. Just put that out there. Like, my whole life experience in the last 10 years of going to Hawaii, going all around, this has taken me all around the world, and especially living in Hawaii for years on end, I've really realized like the thing that actually destroys health the most is the city. It's the most unhealthy place you can be. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I won't go into like every little nook and cranny of that, but I think most of you kind of can sense that, especially if you have been to a semi-tropical environment or you've been in the redwoods, the old growth forest, and you've been in nature. You kind of get a sense that like, oh, okay, there's some kind of connection here. There's something beyond my peripheral perceptive qualities that's judging everything based on what I can see, taste, touch, feel physically. It's beyond my sensorium, which is, just your physical senses. Like, there's something beyond the veil, right? And the more time you spend in nature, you start to realize, like, I actually feel better. Like, I don't feel as hyper-stressed. The biggest epidemic of civilization is sympathetic overload, which is where your nervous system goes into a hyper fight or flight state. We call that the sympathetic nervous system, and it gets locked. And so then, instead of healing that and rerouting that into a parasympathetic state, which is relaxation, digestion, elimination, respiration, all the autonomic functions of living that help you naturally detox and cleanse, that help you absorb your nutrients and you just live a healthy life, people get locked into it because their environment is hyper stressful. The people in their environment are stuck in that system, and their mind is probably hijacked with all kinds of symbolic programming that's disturbing their consciousness. So there's all this projection going on there, and then it gets stuck on our auric field. It just gets stuck on us, and our nervous system is actually on red alert. And it's actually like, hello, there's a problem, malfunction, the system overload. Can't breathe properly, so our breathing is shallow. Well, I can't heal. There's this thing, it's starting to metastasize. It's going out of control. Metastasizing cancer, tumor, whatever. Blood sugar imbalances, pancreatic dysfunction, etc., etc. All that stuff is the manifestation of a body and mind that's out of balance, like a dis-ease. It's just a body and mind that's in dis-ease. It's in a disarray, right? And we know that getting back into nature is the quickest way to get back into connection, because the problem with everything in civilization is that it's disconnection based. If you look at like trauma, if you really study trauma and you get into like clinical psychiatry and really study developmental psychology, you start to really look at trauma a little bit differently than maybe we were taught. Like, we were taught that a trauma is an event that happened to us and that traumatized us, right? And then we keep repeating the cycle. It's called repetitive compulsion in psychology. It says we keep repeating that, we compulsively repeat the trauma. It's like we keep going back to the addictive substance. We keep going back to the toxic relationship. We keep going back to the thing that's keeping us, which is from the real trauma is the disconnection. So the event and the trauma have to be disassociated in order for true healing to happen. Because if you think that the event is the trauma, you're going to keep in your mind, you're going to keep tracing back to the event, which triggers the disconnection, but you're not actually addressing what's the core issue. The core issue is that you're a human being that's disconnected. Does that make sense? So you actually, we can actually rewrite the whole story, because it's all a story anyway, it's all made up. And when we look back on the past, we are reinterpreting and re-scripting the event anyways. and we're filtering it based on new information, so it's not even real anyways. But we re-experience it as if it's happening over and over and over, and that's how we stay in that sympathetic state, because we haven't dealt with the fact that, hey, I'm actually feeling disconnected. And so what happens then we go into the addictive patterns, because they help us feel something. Like what, coffee, right? Like what is that about? Like that's easily one of the biggest drugs going. It has a functional use, right? But the way that it's being done is nothing short of a full-blown drug. And it helps people feel stimulated, and feel endorphins. It mimics certain chemicals in the brain and helps you feel like serotonergic, like the serotonergic system, your serotonin, for example. It'll help boost that, but at a dopamine cost. So eventually your adrenals start to fall out if you do that in a hyper way. You rely on like a crutch. There's a million different things we could say. I don't want to make that the focus of the talk, but it's ultimately the disconnection that we feel that causes the dis-ease. And so you might, if you're really on that train of thought, you might have to trace back and reverse engineer your life experience to actually go back to where you were a child and you had that first event happen. And you might be carrying some wounds of rejection and abandonment, and whether it's masculinated wounds or it's feminized wounds, meaning the female and masculine experience, right? And how society has not nurtured that whatsoever. And for men, we have had no rites of passage. So we don't actually have that transition from boyhood into manhood. So you have all these men that are basically have a Peter Pan syndrome and are just hopping around. And then the wounding to the feminine is pretty obvious, right? How that and just the manipulation and how all that plays into, and ultimately all that is just a bunch of distorted patterns based on the fact that, hey, I'm wounded. I have wounding, and that's the first place that we have to get, is actually just get into that place where we can admit that. And that's the thing I've learned with this whole thing about how do you optimize the human experience? Well, you got to actually get to a place where you can be honest with yourself of hey, I've actually experienced wounds, I've experienced psychological issues, I've experienced emotional, I have physical issues going on, and now I'm going to allow myself to explore that. I'm going to start to investigate my own experience, because I believe, as Napoleon Hill said in his book Think and Grow Rich, that built inside every problem is the seed of its solution. So you can't have a problem or a challenge or an obstacle without the solution to it being built into it. But if you're disconnected and you're numbing yourself and tranquilizing yourself and medicating it and all that stuff, then it's going to keep you insulated from experiencing the solution. The solution creates spontaneous healing, spontaneous abundance.